Hello and welcome to Acquiring Movement Skills screencast. The new topic we're going to be focusing on is phases of learning movement skills. Now, if I just show you here what you're going to need to be able to do by the end of this screencast, and certainly by the end of tomorrow's lesson or Wednesday's lesson, you're going to need to be able to understand that when you learn a new skill, you go through three phases. Okay, so you start off as a beginner, you then move through to an intermediate, then you go through to an advanced. Now, you never use those words, they have different names. So basically, start off, first phase of learning, what's it called? You need to know that. You need to be able to describe at least two characteristics of each phase of learning, and you need to be able to do that for the second phase and the third phase. So basically what we're going to do tonight is have a quick look through what those three phases of learning are called. That'll be your first thing you'll have to know. And secondly, we're going to need to know some characteristics that underpin each phase of when you learn a movement skill. So if we go on, first phase of learning is called the cognitive phase of learning. Now, in the cognitive phase of learning, what happens is that basically you will have a performer will have to create a mental picture. So when you first learn a skill, you have to think about it and create a picture of what you're going to actually perform. Moving on from that, you also have a period of trial and error. Well, that means that you try the skill. For example, it might be the first time you try to do a seat drop in trampolining, and you try it a few times, but you don't do it. You make errors. Okay, and that is a key characteristic of that first phase of learning. Another characteristic is that the cognitive phase of learning has low levels of fluency. This means that when you try to do it, often the movements are jerky, they don't quite come off, it doesn't feel smooth when you're performing them. So what you need to know is this word here, fluency, and there's a low level of fluency. Finally, the one that isn't on here is feedback. Now, during this first phase of learning, the cognitive phase of learning, you rely on something called extrinsic feedback, and this is feedback from an external source, from outside. So it's basically things such as a coach telling you what to do. You can't actually work it out for yourself. So there we go, you've got four characteristics there. You're probably going to need three maximum, but what we're going to need, so you should have create a mental picture, perform or create a mental picture, trial and error, it's a period of trial and error, low levels of fluency, and finally, the performer relies on extrinsic feedback or external feedback, such as a coach. Okay, going on from there then, the middle phase of learning is called the associative phase, and if you say that something associates, it makes a link. Okay, so what happens here then is a performer can make a link between the mental picture they have of the skill in their brain and actually physically or practically performing it. So it's that process where you start to make a connection or a link between mental image and practical performance. It is known as the practice stage. It's where you practice it because you now know roughly how to do it, and it allows you to practice it with a little bit more clarity. At this stage, we have this word fluency again. There are improved levels of fluency. Okay, and finally, when talking about feedback, this is the stage where you start, so the associative stage is the stage where you start to use intrinsic feedback. So you start to be able to make adjustments yourself based on what you know already from the cognitive phase of learning. So stage 2 is the associative phase of learning. This is your first characteristic, this is your second, third, but do not forget feedback. Now feedback, remember, a performer will start to use intrinsic feedback. It can't be fully used, but they start to use it. Moving on then. So, autonomous phase of learning. So the autonomous phase of learning, at this point, this is where we're talking about experts, we're talking about professionals. Some of you will be highly skilled in your own sport. And when you are in this autonomous stage of learning, what it's referring to is it's saying that your movements or the movements you perform are automatic. All skills that you do, you don't think about them. So the word you're looking for is automatic, and I think this is good because it links to the word which is in the phase of learning there, which is autonomous. Okay, so automatic. Then feedback in this stage is now intrinsic. So you start to use intrinsic feedback pretty much all the time because you can detect and correct your own errors now, and you start to use, you can feel when you're doing things wrong, you can adapt and change it. In this phase of learning, there are high levels of fluency. Okay, so now this word fluency, remember, has gone through all 3 phases of learning. It's a vital one. So instead of being low levels or improved levels, it's now high levels, so you contextualise in this word fluency. The final one, which isn't on here, oh, it has, I have already talked about that feedback. So you've kind of got those things there. So back to what we said at the start, if you're looking at the kind of big picture here, what is the first phase of learning? So you would need to know that that is the cognitive phase of learning, and then you would need to be able to write at least kind of 3 characteristics about that phase of learning that makes it the first phase of learning. Okay, then second phase of learning, 3 characteristics. Third phase of learning, 3 characteristics. Now tomorrow's lesson will be about me giving you ways to memorise, sorry about that, memorise the different phases of learning, how you kind of characterise them, and then after that we'll be looking at sporting examples and how you can link them to it. Okay, thank you very much.